I request both the speakers for today, Professor Zakaria Abdul Hamid and Mr. Kamran Akhtar, to come to the stage and take their seats. We will start the proceedings with the recitation from the Holy Quran.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان صدق الله العظيم. أعوذ بالله من
Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and good morning. My name is Khurshid Hasnain and I'm an advisor at Comstech. Welcome to all of you, both of those who are participating here physically, as well as many of our participants who would be online for this introductory course on science diplomacy and sustainability. We are very pleased to welcome all of you, the members of the diplomatic corps, persons from representing various government organizations and academia, as well as some students, and to this very important and timely subject. Let me just say a few words about this particular event. Comstech, as you know, is the OIC Ministerial Standing Committee for Scientific and Technological Cooperation. And we pursue our mandate through a variety of initiatives, most of them involving multinational cooperation between various member states, and also often involving other international organizations such as the United Nations, the European Union, or sometimes the African Union. So our activities in these various domains include the areas of health and medicine, in food security, in water, in developing the capacities of member states in various areas of science and technology. And in these recently, we are also focusing strongly on the areas of the new technologies such as artificial intelligence and robotics, etc. So of course, as you can understand and imagine, our area itself involves both the main themes of today's lectures, that is the role of science and technology in ensuring development in a sustainable manner, because the challenges of sustainability and climate change are now so profound and so widespread that no matter what initiatives you perceive and you pursue, you have to take into account not only the impact it may have on the development, but also on the impact it is expected to have on the sustainability of such endeavors. And since secondly, of course, since our initiatives involve not only one member state at a time, but various member states, and we are required to sensitize governments and organizations about the importance of using science and technology in a rational and a beneficial manner, sustainable manner. So obviously we are engaged in, you can say, both these areas, and we really hope to learn from the experience and the wisdom of both of our speakers today. They are Mr. Kamran Akhtar from the Pakistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He will be introduced in detail when he comes to speak. And sorry. And our main speaker today is Dr. Zakri Abdul Hamid, who will be delivering his lectures in two parts. The first part before the tea interval, and the second part after the interval. And of course, there will be a session of question and answer at the end of each of his sessions. So welcome to both our speakers, and thank you very much for being with us. To welcome all of you formally and to talk in more detail about the role of comstech and this particular event today, I now request the Coordinator General of comstech, Professor Dr. Iqbal Chaudhary, for his welcoming remarks. He will be speaking to you online from the ICCBS Institute in Karachi University. Professor Iqbal Chaudhary.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first welcome our key speaker, Professor Dr. Tansari Zikri Abdul Hamid, Chairman of ATRI Advisory Malaysia and former Science Advisor of the Prime Minister of Malaysia. Our dear brother, Mr. Muhammad Kamran Akhtar, Additional Secretary, ACDIS, Section Planning and Development, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Professor Dr. Khurshid Hasnan, Advisor to comstech, senior diplomats, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm absolutely pleased to welcome you to this very important short course on a topic which is of immense importance. This is a short course which we have decided to conduct around the visit of Professor Dr. Zakri, who is here to attend a very important event to be held in Karachi starting from tomorrow morning. So he's going to fly back to Karachi, inshallah, to attend 24th conference of the Islamic World Academy of Sciences, in which we have representatives from 19 countries. And this is the reason why I'm not there to personally welcome you in person at the comstech headquarters. But I fully understand that this course has attracted lots of attention. For that, I would like to recognize the contribution of my colleague, Professor Dr. Khurshid Hasnan, for disseminating information and bringing together a very large number of participants. There are 88 participants, including many senior diplomats. I can see many of our dear colleagues representing their countries in Islamabad, including ambassadors of Kazakhstan and other countries. We also have academicians, policymakers, and science students in this course. This reflects not only the importance of the topic, but also the stature of the speakers which we have today. Professor Dr. Tansari Zakri Abdul Hamid is among the most distinguished individuals with lifelong contributions in the field of science and technology, not only in his own country, but also in different parts of the world. He is a global leader in science diplomacy. His lifelong efforts has helped many countries of the world to develop productive collaboration for missions. He has not only been the architect of Malaysian science and technology-based development, but also a very strong advocate of global science and technology capacity building and cooperation for inclusive and sustainable development. He has truly loving and inspiring personality, and he has been a great friend of Comstech and of Pakistan. We also have with us Mr. Kamran Akhtar, a brilliant and impressive diplomat. His profound understanding of how science soft power can be used for global common good and for protecting and nurturing the diplomatic interests of Pakistan is certainly extremely impressive. The topic of the course is timely and relevant. Though term science diplomacy is relatively new, the concept has been deployed for bringing nations together for common cause, despite political and ideological differences all through the history. The topic of science diplomacy for sustainability is even more relevant in today's context. Even very definition of what is sustainable and what is not is actually based on hard scientific research and the data which science produced. Science defines what is sustainability in terms of many aspects of it. With 9 billion inhabitants on planet Earth, how much and how long the Earth's finite resources can sustain existence of sustained human life form without threatening the very existence of other life forms and ecosystem. How much Earth's fragile ecosystem can sustain the rising temperature before the point of no return. How long over 70% of the Earth resources consumed by 20% population will be able to sustain the one world resources. How long this whole paradigm of overconsumption of resources can be sustained is something which one needs to understand. If we ever agree and hope soon, how we will be able to mitigate and then restore ecosystem of the world. Diplomacy is required to bring nations together, whereas science is required to make them realize the grave situation we are in. The hard facts and numbers, undeniable data and research is needed to trigger action, and that is the reason why science is extremely important in all diplomatic efforts, not only for socio-economic development, but also at the same time for reaching out to the other nations for common climate action. comstech has been introduced by Dr. Khurshid Hasnain. This OIC Standing Committee comprised of 57 ministers of OIC member states. And we are working on various aspects of science diplomacy. This is an institution which is able to bring together the whole spectrum of countries despite their political and ideological differences. We work not only within the institution in Muslim world, but also beyond. I can tell you the example of excellent science diplomatic efforts of comstech. We have been working closely with International Foundation of Science and dispersing research grants of uh, over $1 million in last 3 years, which we have done with IFS. We have also developed collaboration with International Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, specifically for the development of biotechnology and its application in agriculture, health and industries, and that is also a fairly large program. We are working with the World Academy of Sciences for a very interesting program called Science in Exile, largely focusing on refugee scientists in the Muslim world. And of course, we have a very large number of other initiatives with UNESCO and other institutions. As the Africa program, even in countries where we do not really have our diplomatic presence, such as Chad and Burkina Faso, direct diplomatic presence, has been, these programs are actually very effective of introducing not only comstech's initiative, but also Pakistan's excellence in the field of health. We have been very active in Health Africa program in Niger, Uganda, Sudan, and other countries. Comstech is operating the largest fellowship programs, over 700 fellowships for different segments of education and research, including program for women scientists, food security, virology, least developed African countries, and also Muslim minorities in non-OIC countries. Comstech is able to bring institutions together. So I can give you the example that University of Engineering and Technology, Lahore, has established a very high quality computer science faculty in the University of Gambia. ICCBS, International Center for Chemical and Biological Sciences in Karachi, is establishing internationally accredited halal product testing laboratory in Uganda, IUIU, Islamic University in Uganda. Arid Agriculture University of Rawalpindi is transferring technology in the field of citrus and in various Nigerian institutions through Nigerian Raw Material Institute and many more. Comstech has also initiated programs, which are country-specific programs with Yemen in the field of public health, with Palestine in the field of higher education, Sudan in the area of food security, and Somalia both in public health and food security. So there are many facets of the Comstech activity, and they all fall within the paradigm of science diplomacy, of course, for the good cause. At the end, let me express my gratitude to the key speaker, our dear brother, Tansri Professor Dr. Zakri Abdul Hamid, for his presence here. He is very inspiring, and he has been traveling all over the world. His love for the country, for Pakistan, is indeed an asset for us, and we are always very proud of his achievements and his contribution towards the development of Comstech, as well as for Pakistan, because he has been engaged with Pakistan's top leadership since last several decades. Also grateful to Mr. Kamran Akhtar for his support to Comstech and for very brilliant advices at every time of need, whenever we need him. I'm also very grateful to all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for your presence here, and looking forward to have a very good outcome of this short course. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Professor Iqbal, for your welcoming remarks. And now it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Mohammad Kamran Akhtar, the Additional Secretary from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with his background in physics, like myself, and his vast experience in foreign affairs, unlike myself, to please address this occasion on the subject of role of science in diplomacy. Mr. Kamran Akhtar.
Assalamu alaikum and good morning. Dr. Iqbal Chaudhary, Chansiri Professor Zakri. It's a pleasure to have you here, and I've heard a lot about you, though we've never met before. I'll be talking about the role of science in diplomacy. Usually, I start my talk with an image because I'm very fond of this image, and I would like to display this image and pose a question to the audience whether how many people are familiar with this image? What does it depict? This image is represents the capture of a muon at a CMS detector at the Large Hadron Collider experiment in CERN. And this capture of muon actually depicted that the Higgs boson actually exists, the so-called God particle. Prior to its discovery in 2012, the Higgs boson was one of the missing pieces of the standard model of physics. This discovery not only confirmed the existence of Higgs boson, it also strengthened the standard model of physics. And what has it got to do with science diplomacy or Pakistan? Well, this muon was captured on a detector which was manufactured in Pakistan. Not only that, it was Dr. Abdus Salam, a physicist from Pakistan, which through his work on the electroweak theory also corroborated the standard model of physics. So Pakistan has got to do a lot to do with the Large Hadron Collider experiment at CERN. But not many people at the international level, and what to talk about the international level, even inside Pakistan, know about this. Now just imagine the strength of this image. Pakistan is not usually at the international level associated with science and technology. People associate Pakistan with a lot of negative things. So this image building through science for us in diplomacy is one of the most powerful medium to project a positive image of Pakistan at the international level. Historically, science has been used in diplomacy. There are historical accounts of the Muslim Caliph Mamunur Rashid presenting scientists products made by his scientists like the compass, like clocks to emissaries from Europe. And they used to return very impressed with the advancement of the Islamic civilization. The Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1961, while enumerating the role of diplomats, also recognizes the development of economic, cultural, and scientific relations between states as one of the responsibilities of the diplomats. SDI has been a determinant of military power, but increasingly it is becoming a determinant of soft power as well. Science has played a great role in terms of bringing nations together. During the height of Cold War, when the Soviet Union and the US were witnessing a lot of tensions, Reagan and Gorbachev was able to agree in 1985 for collaboration for fusion research, which led to the establishment of the ITER reactor in France. In 2009, when President Obama decided to reach out to the Muslim world, he realized that the political issues between America and the Muslim countries were quite intractable. And the one way to reach out to the Muslim world, aside from the politics, was through science and technology. And that is when he announced the special fund for support technological development in the Muslim world. Now, in the present era, we see that the great power contestation playing out at the global level, it's all about technology. It's all about trade wars and wars over intellectual property rights. So technology has become a great determinant in this era. As I mentioned regarding that image of capture of muon at CERN, countries are increasingly using science and technology for image building. The lunar far side landing by China was to establish Chinese advancement in science and technology, because the scientific benefits of this far side landing far exceeded the political message. They were not that much, and the political message exceeded the scientific benefits of this landing. Then there have been states which have conducted anti-satellite weapons tests, and afterwards claiming that they have now joined a select group of countries. During the COVID-19 pandemic, and as I mentioned earlier, it is increasingly becoming an element of soft power. The ability of the states to manage and handle the COVID-19 pandemic became a measure of relative decline or relative rise of great powers. And we saw in a number of instances, vaccine diplomacy playing out at various levels. Then access to technology is being used as a geopolitical tool. We've seen that countries have been granted special waivers. They have been authorized to have access to advanced military technology with a view to building them up against the rivals of superpowers. Again, science has been used to enhance national morale. The Russians named the vaccine Sputnik just to establish their lead in development of vaccines, as they had led in space technologies during the 1960s. And how science is determining the relative power of states is evident from the fact that China's share of world R&D expenditure was 24% in 1996. It is now around 42%, which reflects Chinese global power more than its prowess in science and technology. Similarly, Asia's share in global scientific publications around 1995 was 14%. Now it has increased to 40%, commensurate with Asia's rise as a global manufacturing hub and trade hub. China has transformed itself from the factory of the world to the laboratory of the world now. We need science and technology in diplomacy because of various factors. We have global challenges like climate change, like public health, water, energy, and food security. And all of these challenges have their solutions rooted in science and technology. Not only that, it is difficult for any one country to meet those challenges alone, which requires collaboration between states at the international level, and hence the need for science diplomacy. WIPO report on geography of innovation, it is a bit dated report. I couldn't get hold of the latest report, but about 2 years back, the WIPO report did mention that the international scientific collaborations grew by 25% from the year 2000 onwards, which means, which also is indicative of the need for scientific collaboration to deal with the international challenges. There are obvious benefits of international STI collaboration, like the pooling of expertise, facilities, and sources of funding. North-South collaboration is important because in the North, we have cutting-edge technologies, and the South is in need for such technologies. But at the same time, we should not discount the importance of South-South collaboration. The countries of the South have similar challenges, and at times, collaboration between countries of the South is much more cost-effective than North-South collaboration. And I'll recount an example. I was representing Pakistan at the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna about 20 years back. And while I was there, the IAEA was approached by a cancer radiotherapy center in Sudan. Their linear accelerator broke down. And the IAEA consulted some UK-based consultants, which told the IAEA that they would require $500,000, $0.5 million to fix the linear accelerator after visiting the hospital, cancer hospital in Sudan. At that time, the IAEA approached me as a representative of Pakistan, and I was able to set up a meeting between the technicians sitting in Khartoum and technicians sitting in Comstech in Pakistan Atomic Energy Commission. And after half an hour of video conferencing, tweeting a knob here, a knob there, the linear accelerator was up and running again in 30 minutes without any cost. So that is the kind of potential which South-South collaboration holds. Again, we see that Ebola and many other tropical diseases in Africa have been around for many years. But it was only in 2014 when Ebola for the first time traveled to the Western Hemisphere in the US and in Europe that a vaccine was developed within 1 year. Before that, nobody was bothered about developing a vaccine for Ebola because it was a tropical disease, mostly affecting developing countries, which couldn't pay for R&D on a vaccine. This this holds true for all the challenges of the developing countries. The developed world will not be much interested in those challenges till the time that they have their own interest in that. Hence, this need for South-South collaboration. And in that regard, platforms like comstech, they assume a lot of importance. Now, most of the people are familiar with that there are various facets of science diplomacy, which includes diplomacy for science, when diplomats are trying to build linkages and networking between scientists in countries outside Pakistan. Then science for diplomacy, when we employ science for image building, when we employ science for bringing nations together, and finally science for science in diplomacy. We as diplomats are involved in very technical negotiations at the international level involving public health, climate change, arms control and disarmament. And that is where scientific inputs become very important for us. So that is another facet of science diplomacy. These have been some of the objectives of the Science Diplomacy Initiative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Pursuit of foreign policy objectives, it goes without saying. Facilitating national development, fostering STI collaborations, bringing sharper focus on SDGs implementation, because most of the contemporary challenges, climate change, public health, water, energy, food security, they are integrated in the SDGs. Basically, science diplomacy acts as a bridge between the political aspiration to meet the SDGs and the actual capacity to implement the SDGs by any country. Human resource development is one of the important areas whereby we place our scientists with organizations like the ICTP, the International Center for Theoretical Physics, and CERN in Geneva, and other scientific organizations with a view to developing the capacity of our scientists. It links Pakistani centers of excellence with foreign centers of excellence. Educational linkages is one other aspect. We also help our overseas employment corporations to match their labor skills with the international labor market through the TVETs, the technical and vocational education training programs. First, we reach out to the countries abroad. We assess their requirements in terms of the labor market, and then we guide our TVETs to accordingly train the Pakistani labor force. It can help us in improving competitive edge in trade. by enabling our industries to meet the SPS regulations abroad. And as I mentioned earlier, showcasing Pakistan's progress in science and technology. We would also like to increase high technology exports from Pakistan through this initiative. One example, during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, the then government allocated $6 million for the SAARC countries. Now we have around 7 SAARC countries, minus Pakistan, 6 SAARC countries, which meant a very small amount of $1 million for each SAARC country, which wouldn't have been, in terms of visibility, it would have been peanuts. So we couldn't do with such an amount. But then the Ministry of Foreign Affairs advised the government at that time not to give cash payments to the SAARC countries, rather buy equipment which was made in Pakistan, COVID-related protection equipment, CPAP breathing aids, and ventilators, which our startups were able to come up with. And we donated those that equipment to the SAARC countries, which was good in terms of visibility, which was good in terms of introducing Pakistan's technological products in potential markets abroad, and which enabled us to the extent possible, to compete with the vaccine diplomacy, which was being conducted by our neighbor at that time. Popularization of science in Pakistan is also one of the aims of science diplomacy, because we believe that a society which values science is a society which is respected abroad as well. I'll skip the case study. Finally, science diplomacy, what we've learned through our experience since 2016, when we started this initiative, it needs an ecosystem. It cannot go on without the requisite ecosystem. And the most important aspect is to train not only the diplomats with this, to make them familiar with the scientific aspect of the issues they are dealing with at the international level, but at the same time also to sensitize the scientists about the legal and diplomatic aspects of the work they do in, for example, biological labs and other places. We have been working with the Ministry of Science and Technology and with Comstech for mobilizing political support for science and technology, coordinating with the policymakers for prioritization of science and technology at the national level. But one important thing, and that applies to both collaborations at the national level as well as international level, is mapping and foresight. Without having a proper assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of our country and other countries and of the organizations within the country, we cannot perform our role of matchmaking very well. So that is one area where organizations within Pakistan, like the Comstech and Comsets, they need to focus on mapping the scientific landscape within Pakistan. And as there was a study like this conducted by the OIC in collaboration with Comstech some 12 years back, but I think that study needs to be upgraded. And under that study, there were science and technology reports published on Malaysia, on Jordan, and 2 or 3 other countries. But this exercise needs to be expanded to other countries of the OIC as well. Long-term STI planning is very important in terms of seeing that where we want to go with science and technology, and what is the role science and technology has to play in the overall national socio-economic development plans. Now, for that, STI communication, scientific communication between the scientists and the policymakers becomes very important. For that to happen, we need to teach our scientists how to communicate with the society, because they should not be seen as some people sitting in secluded laboratories and doing some esoteric work. They have to make the society realize of the relevance of their work to the societal challenges, to the socio-economic development plans of the country. Because otherwise they won't be able to convince the policymakers to prioritize science and technology in the overall national socio-economic development plans. Communication sometimes within the scientific communities are very important. This I say out of experience because we are dealing with various scientific organizations in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What happens is that we have a number of good biological research centers in Pakistan, like the NIPG, like the NIAB, which have been recognized by the International Atomic Energy Agency as the centers of excellence in agricultural biotechnology. Yet these scientists face a lot of difficulties in terms of commercialization of their products, because there is another Ministry of Climate Change, which has adopted certain regulations under the Biodiversity Convention. And that Biodiversity Convention rules, they prohibit GMOs within Pakistan. So there is one set of rules which prohibits commercialization of GMOs, while our laboratories are working in silos on this very aspect. There is a need for coordination between the scientific communities, because in the Ministry of Climate Affairs as well, there is a group of scientists which is working on these regulations. So scientific communication plays a very important role. Scientific communication with the society becomes important because we saw propaganda campaigns against against COVID-19 and polio vaccines. Then it were the scientists which were able to sensitize the policymakers about the threats posed to climate change, to the future of humanity. And that is where climate change was given its due position in the international agenda. This is one example of how nuclear science and technology is being utilized in Pakistan. We are pursuing 11 out of the 17 SDGs through nuclear application. And Foreign Office was interested in the publication of a brochure highlighting the application of nuclear science and technology for the pursuit of SDGs as a part of our image building exercise, because most of the times Pakistan's nuclear program is wrongly associated with national security only, whereas the bulk of the program is oriented towards socio-economic development. So this was to address the negative association of nuclear science and technology with security. These are some of the images of nuclear applications in science and technology, nuclear application in SDGs. Of course, nuclear energy is a clean and affordable alternative to fossil fuels, given the impact of climate change for Pakistan. These are the magnetic support collars which were made in Pakistan and provided to the CERN experiment in Geneva. This is the sextupole magnet, which was developed in Pakistan and supplied to the Sesame experiment in Jordan. And finally, just let me take you back to the image which I displayed in the beginning. This image again reminds me of the saying of one of a renowned American photographer. And he said that there is nothing worse than a bright image of a fuzzy object. But I always say that there is something worse than that. It is a fuzzy image of a bright object. There are sparks of brightness within Pakistan. And as somebody who's dealing with science diplomacy, it is our job to highlight those sparks of brilliance inside Pakistan through science diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamran, for your enlightening lecture, focusing on various aspects of science diplomacy and Pakistan's efforts to engage with this, particularly with regard to the CERN experiments. You mentioned one item which I wanted to respond to, that is the need to upgrade the science and technology reports that the Comstech developed several years ago. I'm happy to inform you that we are indeed doing that, and we have already completed the country reports on science, technology, and innovation for 32 of our member states. I will be very happy to share them with you. Before inviting our next speaker, the keynote speaker, Professor Zakaria Abdul Hamid, who has been briefly introduced by the Quarter General Comstech, let me say a few words which he did not mention, that in addition to his vast experience as an advisor to the government of Malaysia, and the Prime Minister of Malaysia, he's also been a member of the Scientific Advisory Board to the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, and is currently the Vice Chair of the Council of the UN Technology Bank for Least Developed Countries, based in Turkey, and a distinguished fellow of the Global Federation for the Competitiveness Council. And of course, he is the distinguished professor and founding director of the newly established International Institute of Science, Diplomacy, and Sustainability at UCSI University in Malaysia. Before inviting him to deliver his lecture and to enlighten us on this very important subject, and without in any way trying to preempt his profound comments, let me say a few words to put his lecture in its very important context, which may allow you to appreciate it even more. I believe there are three critical issues that are confronting mankind. Three, you could say, existential issues confronting us, which we need to address with great urgency and solemnity. The first one is the issue of development, ensuring the basic needs of mankind, of a vast majority of mankind who are without basic needs and without some of the most essential requirements of safety and health and education, etc. And of course, of having a decent existence. So this is, of course, the development is one of the key issues confronting us, particularly in regard to the lesser developed nations of the world. The second related issue is, of course, enabling this development and this progress without destroying the Earth's environment and its resources, and without depleting its resources irreversibly, and without causing the damage of climate change, which we have heard so much about. So this is the second connected existential crisis, that is how to develop without destroying. And the third, I would say, is that to enable this development and this scientific efforts, etc., technological efforts, without frictions and without conflicts between nations. Inevitably, when we fight for resources or fight for development, there are conflicts of interest between nations, and that's where the issue of cooperation comes in. And of course, you appreciate that science and technology is at the heart of this conundrum, represented by all these three questions: development and sustainability and avoidance of conflict. So, and in particular, I would say, with regard to the OIC countries, we could add probably a fourth issue of concern, which yesterday Dr. Zakaria and I were discussing over dinner, and that is the issue of sensitizing our leaderships and our people on the extreme urgency of these crises, and of the need to utilize science and technology to address them in a rational and humane manner. So without further ado, I would request Professor Zakaria Abdul Hamid for his lectures.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning to all the distinguished guests. Professor Chair, friends and colleagues, I am very honored and delighted to be back here in Islamabad and comstech to deliver two lectures on science diplomacy and sustainability. Please stay on for the second lecture because that is the most interesting one. When I talk about the role of diplomats in championing science and sustainability. But before beginning my lecture also, ladies and gentlemen, I want to pay tribute to the science and the scientists in Pakistan. Just now, my colleague, the first speaker, very modestly talked about the achievement of scientists from Pakistan. But I want to remind ourselves of this great nation and its sons and daughters. One name that would come to mind would be the Nobel laureate, Abdul Salam. Of course, he was not able to do the seminal science that is expected of a Nobel laureate in Pakistan. He was in Italy and I think in Cambridge, but that speaks a volume about scientists in Pakistan. Secondly, the other person, as you know, is Professor A.Q. Khan, as you know, the nuclear scientist who is much maligned by the rest of the world. That speaks volume also about the achievement of science and scientists in Pakistan. And it is only natural that comstech would take the lead in championing science, in particular for the global south, in particular for the OIC member states, in particular for the least developed countries. I want to argue on this point towards the end of my second lecture. I want to hand over that responsibility to all of you here. Even if you think you're not a scientist, but the role of the diplomat is equally crucial. So let me begin by talking about the challenges of sustainability. This is very well known, the 17 SDGs, which was agreed in 2015, and now in 2023, we are halfway of the target date of 2030. And if you look at all these goals, they are all predicated by science, technology, and innovation to achieve many of those goals. It cannot be denied. But this is a global, inclusive process, not only with the scientists, but also with the policymakers, in particular, the political leaders, the politicians. Ladies and gentlemen, eventually I would argue the lack of progress that we are making in terms of overcoming the sustainability problem is the lack of commitment of our political leaders. Here again, I think senior government officials and diplomats have a big role to play. And if you look at this SDG now, yes, last year there was a report card released on the goals, and I'll just focus on a number of those goals. One on poverty. So we see here that progress has been erased because of COVID-19. It's not really caused by the lack of commitment, but the challenge of the virus is so tremendous that there are figures here which shows that extreme poverty has increased almost 100 million more than the pre-pandemic projection. So it is a very grave concern. The second one, I think, on zero hunger, here again, the UN estimate as many as 800 million people may have suffered hunger in 2021. And the Ukraine crisis has caused further food shortages for the world's poorest people. So this is another big problem from the SDG. Third one, good health and well-being is the same assessment. COVID-19 is threatening decades of progress on global health. And we see here by mid-2022, last year, 500 million people have been infected worldwide. That is not to mention other diseases. The next one, ladies and gentlemen, is quality education. Again, this has caused severe disruption to education system. And here we give a figure of the hundreds of million children missing in-person teaching. Very, very grave concern. And moving on, some of the other targets. One is on clean energy. We have this problem of people still without electricity at the current rate that we are going. And of course, another aspiration is reduce inequalities. Before COVID-19, income inequality was narrowing, but the effects of the pandemic are reversing any positive trend. And on top of that is exacerbated by the Ukraine crisis. So I just pick out some of the key goals of the SDG. And in terms of sustainability, ladies and gentlemen, you must know by now very well, this is due to our unsustainable way from a more or less infinite Earth in the 21st century due to human activities. Somehow the globe, the Earth look smaller. As Mahatma Gandhi once mentioned, there's enough for everyone's needs, but not enough for everyone's greed. And that is the adage that we are in today. And just to show you, the total human dominance over the earth is depicted here in this very interesting map. If you look at each of those small yellow dots representing an airplane, can you imagine the amount of aircraft operating at one time as we speak? It's just so tremendous, isn't it? We have conquered the earth really, and this is reflected here. Of course, there are regions of the world which is more busy than the rest. So we know humans are now agent for geological change. So for the first time in human history, our technologies and the ways people use them have the capacity to transform the biosphere itself. We are almost like the geologic change, human activities. So these are the kind of figures that can be provided. The science of geology have always taught us that Earth processes were large and powerful, that nothing humans could do would change them. But now with forests being cleared, factories and amenities being built, and fossil fuels being burned, we have changed the chemistry of our atmosphere, causing sea level to rise, ice to melt, and climate to change. It's a very powerful Anthropocene event that we are involved in as human. So just to summarize, these are the main problems of our unsustainable world, the global challenges. It can range from food security on the right to climate change, energy, many others, water, biodiversity, poverty, and urbanization, all converging together. Let's look at one by one. Of course, climate change, the image of the polar bear needs no explanation. That's the kind of threat that we are facing today. And of course, on towards storms, floods, drought, what have you. These are all the manifestation of global warming. And as we are following the ongoings in the world today, we are on the brink of a climate catastrophe, and the window is closing rapidly. I will explain later how the global community is reacting to this in a very good way, but maybe not enough. This is the 2015 Paris Climate Summit, which deliver a lot of promises, but we are not sure whether we are achieving the targets. We'll discuss that in the second lecture. And these are some of the key points of the Paris Climate Agreement. The main thing here is to cap our temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and that aspiration has not been really realized. The second global challenges, of course, is on our biodiversity and ecosystem services. These are those services that provide us food, water, clean air, and a number of other services, but it is now under threat. For instance, biodiversity loss are declining. Biodiversity services are declining at an unprecedented rate. There was one report released by the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services in 2019, which states that 1 million species of plants and animals are now threatened with extinction. And even the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres recently mentioned it, that biodiversity is collapsing. 1 million species of plants and animals are at risk of extinction. And the third global environment challenge, ladies and gentlemen, is plastic pollution, of which all of us are guilty of. And here are some of the figures on the use of plastic, but more importantly, how plastic pollution in particular in developing countries, really a source of threat, releasing hazardous chemicals that poison communities and the food chain. Let me very quickly take you through the key drivers of the nature crisis. In fact, there are five. The first one is changes in land use and sea use. And this is really the conversion of land covers, such as forests, wetlands, into agricultural and urban areas. Definitely, ladies and gentlemen, we need this agriculture for our food production, houses for our people, but to what extent this can be balanced? Here, there are figures like nearly 500 million hectares of forest being lost through conversion to other land uses. And as a consequence also, as our population increase, the food system becomes the primary driver of biodiversity loss, with agriculture being identified a threat of more than 85% of species extinction. So there are many ways really to look at this problem. Second one is on climate change. This is also very well known. Suffice to say here, global warming is really affecting human life besides the natural world. Emission is still at a higher level. There are already figures that show that we would exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, which eventually would be a threat to human survival. Third is pollution. This is plastic in particular, which is a major driver of ecosystem loss and also life on Earth. And the fourth one is direct exploitation of natural resources. This is a contentious issue, which I will discuss, and that is the aspect between the need to conserve natural resources, in particular forests, with the need for development. If you look at the industrialized countries, for instance, those with less forest now are asking the developing South to conserve. This is an irony, isn't it? Because in some cases, we still need to exploit our natural resources for our own development. Very contentious sustainable science diplomacy issue, and Malaysia in particular is no stranger to this, when there are already steps taken by groups like the European Union trying to stop the export of palm oil because of their perception of the lack of respect that we have for conservation. This is a contentious point which we can discuss. This is also a point where science diplomacy could eventually contribute to a win-win situation rather than a head-on condition. And of course, the last one is on invasive species. These are species that are brought to a particular area from outside, and they would destroy the native species. This is also a big concern which is being addressed. So I would like just to share here that many of these challenges we face today are international, whether it's tackling climate change or fighting diseases. So these global problems require a global solution. That is why, as identified in SDG number 17, international cooperation is very important. This is also where I think a location like Islamabad could be one of those key hubs to articulate and promote international collaboration. This is the SDG number 17. And I must say, the world community has responded very well to this problem. And we see here, ranging from the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro to all the others following it at the World Summit on Sustainable Development, the Paris Climate Change Summit, and last December, a UN conference on biodiversity, COP15 in Montreal, all point to great effort by the international community to grapple with it. This is the heart of what is known as science diplomacy. But ladies and gentlemen, as they say, talk is cheap. The real challenge is how do you get the message, how do you achieve the target? And as I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture, our efforts have not really been successful. There are many aspects of it, of course. One is the lack of political will, but also all these efforts, ladies and gentlemen, takes funding. It needs money. And most of those problems are residing in the global south. You tell me, where are we going to get the money? We'll talk about that, how we react to the money situation. I will mention one, the funds that needs to fight climate change would be in trillion of dollars per year, $1 trillion US per year. Right now, what we are receiving is only about 20 billion. And that is upon the goodwill of many countries, of course, in the industrialized world. They are also very good partners. My colleague just now mentioned about the need for North-South collaboration, which has been operating for a long time. But he also said that we need South-South cooperation between developing countries. And finally, the need for each country to take action. Just one example before I conclude this lecture. The industrialized countries that have been making leaps and bounds in progress, like South Korea, Japan, or Germany, who are really at the bottom of the barrel after the Second World War, they invested their GDP up to 3.5% in R&D. Whereas the countries in the OIC, the 57 member countries, and the LDCs among us, we'll be proud to spend about 1% of our GDP on R&D. And that is being done by Turkey, of course. Malaysia used to have that number, Excellency, from Malaysia, but now it has been dipping to 1%. You know? That shows how much. And for the rest of the countries, the very poor, they spend 0.001% on R&D. Some don't even spend money on R&D. So the message here is, while we do collaborate, while we do promote science diplomacy, we have to take care of our own business. With that, Chair, let me conclude the first part of my lecture. Thank you. Yeah, yeah. Or repeat later. Later, because at the second one, the.
If there are any questions, Professor Zachary would be happy to respond to them. Okay, so since oh, you have a question, I'm sorry, you didn't see it.
Can you use the mic?
My name is Shahrukh Shafi. I'm from PTV News. I don't know.
It's on.
Yes. Well, my name is Shahrukh Shafi. I'm from PTV News. I don't know this question is relevant to you or not, but let me know, please, that what is the ratio R&D in Pakistan? Because this is related for us to know.
I think he's asking about the GRD of Pakistan.
Since I'm not Pakistani, I'm not going to answer that. I have many friends here who could answer. But from the records, it's less than, I'm not sure what is 1%, but it's not high. You double check that, yeah?
It's about 0.3%.
Yeah.
Yes, the lady there.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. It was very a sort of motivating lecture. We look forward, Professor, you have mentioned about that the developing world, they are looking forward for the all-time resources and finance for the R&D. So I would like your input in that. What is the role of financial management? So, and the coordination between different organizations to put it into the wider spectrum, because we have seen, because I'm representing academia, so we have seen that we work in silos. So there is a lot of research work on different aspects, ecosystem services, plastic pollution, but everyone is working in silos. So there is a need of coordination and the financial management. So I would like your insight into this.
Thank you for that very good question. It's a micro question, but I will respond to you in a macro way first. And that is just to repeat what I just recall in the lecture, that investment on R&D by developing countries is very much to be desired compared to countries like Korea, Japan, or Germany, or even Singapore. That is the macro situation, yeah? So I would venture that's one of the reasons why we are developing or we are underdeveloped. Secondly, the micro part, what you just said is true. Even within a country, even my country, and I suspect also Pakistan and many countries in the OIC, they don't really have a strong S&T architecture. By that, I meant there must be a mechanism within the country where you have a structure of advice. Like, for instance, science advisor to the president or prime minister, or a council of advisors. Then there should be the inputs from the National Academy of Sciences. Now, you know, this Academy of Sciences have their own peculiarities. They are academic. They like to publish and get promotion as professors. But the point is your research relevant to a country's socio-economic development? I would argue the question is no, because they are very happy in their own world. So still in the advisory system, you rightly pointed out, for many countries, there's duplication of effort. Ministry of Science versus Ministry of Environment, even the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, when they should be working together, but they are competing. So in other words, they are duplicating. And in some ways, they are working in silos. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. That also happened. So these are some of the things, what we just said, as a researcher in the university, right? You're right. But my advice, getting you to be a good researcher must go on. You must do your research. Hopefully you get the funding and you publish, and maybe you'll get promoted to being an associate professor and professor in later life. But eventually you must reflect, what is this research do to my country? That is your obligation. And in the second lecture, I will illustrate some of my own experiences. Yeah, graduating from a straight-laced academic in the university to being a sort of a science diplomat. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other question?
If I may just add
Please go ahead.
to the response, Dr. Zakri has very ably described the various aspects of what's happening. But first of all, coming back to how much we spend on R&D as part of our national budget, it used to be 0.2 in 2005. Then in 2005, the OIC adopted a declaration which encouraged its member states to at least increase GERD to up to 0.4% by 2020. Pakistan, when the HEC was newly established, initially put in a lot of money for R&D, and we surpassed the figure of 1%. But now we've come back to again less than 1%. So that is unfortunate, and we keep on losing momentum. One of the problems for science and technology in Pakistan, I'm not sure about how the system in Malaysia works, is the structure of bureaucracy in Pakistan. This is a big problem. We don't have scientists dealing with science policy making inside Pakistan. We have generalists. We have a British system of bureaucracy, which was meant to ensure law and order and to collect taxes. And I'm myself a bureaucrat, and I state with all candidness and honesty, we, the bureaucrats, have ruined this country. We have a secretary science who becomes a secretary culture, who becomes a secretary agriculture next day. And we don't have a specialist. We don't want to hire a specialist to deal with policy making jobs, which require specialists. We keep on trying to get better results through generalists. Until the time we don't work for specialization in bureaucracy, nothing will be put right. Yes.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum everyone. I am Bari Sultan from Misra National Defense University, Istanbul. First of all, I greet you both and all of the members, and it's an honor for us that you are among us. So my question is related to both the scientific innovation as well as diplomacy. Respected members, we have seen that you know that science is like bullet. We make something, and the innovation is definitely positive side.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah.
Can you speak up?
Okay, sorry. So science give you something, it has a positive impacts, but we use the scientific innovation according to our need. So definitely, there is an example of sustainability, but we have seen that the example of Bhutan, I think they have a zero carbon emission, but despite that, in fact, they are the most vulnerable between India and China, the most industrialized states, and this is the most vulnerable area climate change. So what do you say? What would you like to say that what kind of the role of OIC present in a diplomatic way, and how we can use scientific to reduce the carbon emission, especially in this context? What would you like to say about it?
how the diplomacy can reduce carbon emission and how we can use scientific innovation in positive perspectives. Thank you very much.
I think both of us have mentioned that somewhat. Here, I think we talk about the need for the general public, the politician, policymakers, and corporate leaders to understand the role of science, technology, and innovation. But we cannot deny that there's a lot of innovation also in our developing countries. And some of that are being used. I think in Pakistan, it was illustrated how some of these have been carried out. In Malaysia, there is a drone company, Excellency, which is #1 in drone production, is #1, but that is not really known by Malaysia. And they are technical companies that produce bits and pieces of parts for the aerospace industry. So to do that, yes, we already have somewhat. But you are right, the OIC in particular need to have more concerted effort on promoting SDI towards sustainable development. The problem sometimes we look at products from developed countries, industrialized countries, more in awe than what our own people can produce. So here, I think all of us have the responsibility to point out the capability of our own citizens, in particular our own Ummah. The OIC, I think, or even Comstech, have done a lot of projects on that in the past. They've been doing it quite well, but I think more needs to be done. There are a number of countries now in the Islamic world which are powerhouses in science and technology. I cannot speak for Pakistan, but I know countries like Turkey. Turkey has a lot of technical advances through their what is that? Meetup. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Zakri, for the response. With regard to OIC, in the first place, there is a dire need for scientists with scientific communities within the OIC, first of all, to sensitize the leadership about the importance of science and technology, because till the time the leadership is not sensitized, they will not be taking decisions which meaningfully promote science and technology in the society. And in that regard, the OIC took a very correct step in 2015 when they decided to hold a summit exclusively on science and technology. Rather than having a summit meeting discussing political issues, they decided to go for a summit level meeting on science and technology alone. But unfortunately, and this reflects the level of awareness and sensitization among the political leadership about the role of science and technology, hardly 1 or 2 heads of states turned up. It was mostly represented by ambassadors, by embassy representatives in Kazakhstan when the summit was held. The second summit was held online because nobody was willing to pick up the bill for hosting the summit. So that is the first place. And that is where I stress the importance of scientific communications, the scientists talking to the policymakers and talking to the policymakers in the idiom they understand, setting aside the scientific jargon. That is also very important for the scientists to learn. Otherwise, they won't be able to get the priority which they want to have to science and technology. Now, as Dr. Zakri mentioned, there are a number of countries which have areas of excellence. It's only a matter of putting these countries together to really get the things started. That is where there is a need for mapping and foresight, and that will bring up the opportunities for intra-OIC collaboration. The OIC realized the importance of collaboration, for example, on the issue of water, because a majority of OIC countries are water scarce, and the OIC therefore adopted in 2016 a water vision, which envisages the kind of problems which countries in the OIC region face and how they can collaborate. Again, funding becomes an issue, and that is where I come back to my stress on sensitizing the political leadership. The OIC has a health strategy as well, and that health strategy contains some very good elements, provided that there is sufficient funding for the countries to work towards the implementation of the health strategy. The OIC countries talk about collaboration in terms of minimizing or mitigating the impact on environment due to sandstorms. And they annually adopt a resolution and a brief strategy on doing that. But again, it comes to funding. The body within the OIC which is supposed to deal with all these issues is the Ministerial Committee on Science and Technology, which is the comstech. But unfortunately, apart from countries like Turkey, Malaysia, and Pakistan, we hardly find any contribution to the OIC, to the comstech fund by any of the OIC member states. Pakistan, which hosts the comstech, is picking up the overwhelming majority of the responsibility for running of comstech. So that is where comstech needs to reach out to the leadership. Comstech needs to reach out to the diplomat, and the diplomat can then reach out to the political leadership within the OIC.
Assalamu alaikum. I have a question, if time permits. Okay. It's a brief question. My name is Ibrahim Khan. I'm being supervised, I'm doing my PhD currently, and my co-supervisor is from Malaysia, Sheikh Zaki bin Salim from TUM. My supervisor as well was in Malaysia, and we are working on some sustainable projects. Notably, we are trying to optimize current health sector in Pakistan. We have some hospitals in our domain, and we're trying to optimize their thermal comfort levels. A similar project was done in Malaysia as well. So my question regarding the HVAC sector to you people, as you are experts with regards to the domain of sustainability. A lot of our GHGs come from the HVAC systems. Similar problems are being faced in the developed economies and our country as well. So how can we coherently bring in the researchers as well as our governmental officials to respond to this challenge, as it's increasing day by day and our energy consumption is rising, and we need to shift towards some sustainable alternatives? And can we combine the artificial intelligence models as well to optimize our existing infrastructure? Thank you very much.
Can you just briefly repeat the question, because you were not audible? Maybe you need to put the mic a bit at a distance from.
Okay, is it better? Okay, my question was, our healthcare industry or our healthcare sectors, basically, they are consuming a lot of energy in terms of our overall GDP. So my question is, in order to reduce the GHGs or the greenhouse gas emissions, can we devise a strategy on corporate level or governmental level to reduce such emissions and move towards the overall goal of sustainability? That is the whole question.
Yeah.
You're talking about green energy, and it is not restricted to only the healthcare, which you are very familiar with. The need for the green economy, renewables are the aspiration of most countries today, like reducing our dependence on coal and the other fossil fuels. I think most countries are already embarking on that, developed and also developing countries. It's a question of time, I think. It's a question of time. It's a question of trying to improve one's own sophistication. Solar is one of them, of course, but there are also other sources of energy. For instance, biomass, isn't it? Bio-waste is one of them. So I can't be more specific than that.
Okay. Let me say something with which I know Dr. Zakri won't agree. But I would like to put in that perspective as well. And maybe when in the afternoon you're talking about this, you would like to talk about this as well. On this climate change and this politicization of climate change issue, I think we tend to buy a lot of narrative from the West. We in the OIC have been feeling obliged to compromise on our national development goals because of this hoopla about greenhouse gas emissions. But look at that, Pakistan does not even contribute 0.2% to the global greenhouse gas emissions, whereas we are being asked to undertake around equal level of commitments in the Paris Accords. So we shouldn't be worried too much about greenhouse gas emissions. First, we have to develop. And once we are down that development path, we need to ensure that while developing, we do not contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions. So we should be careful about the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. We have, as a part of the global community, a common responsibility to stop greenhouse gas emissions, yet this responsibility has to be differentiated, proportionate to the contributions we've made to greenhouse gas emissions. You've talked about technologies like artificial intelligence, which have a lot of potential in terms of making humans able to make the right decisions and optimal level of production methodologies we can adopt through artificial technologies. But again, here, there is a lot of talk about technological decoupling, tech decoupling, whereby the West would like to retain its monopoly over artificial intelligence, and they are already erecting technology denial regimes. Denial of technology vis-a-vis the developing country. So we face that problem as well. So that is where the OIC countries have to collaborate between themselves. Because on the one hand, these technologies are very important for fighting climate change, for achieving sustainable development goals. On the other hand, technologies are denied to the developing countries. So we have to see how to move forward. So technology, science and technology is not just about science, it is about politics as well. So we have to look at this as well. And once again, really, although I'm a very firm believer that we should be taking action to address the issue of climate change, I do not buy the line being fed to us again and again, whereby we turn into apologists. We shouldn't be turning into apologists. Thank you.
I agree with you, but that'll be the subject of the next lecture.
Any other question? Yeah, okay. We have time for just one more question.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Farhan Ansari. I work at comstech headquarters, Islamabad. My question is addressed to both of the honorable speakers, and it pertains to the role of private sector when we speak of the national development or global development under the UN SDGs. We know that in the developed world, the bulk of the investment or the expenditure on R&D comes from the private sector, which is not true for Pakistan and other developing countries. And also, when we speak of the conservation of environment, I think the role of private sector is also very important. So We know that private sector did wonders in the case of Malaysia as well. So what is it that countries like Pakistan or other developing countries must do to convince the private sector to not only invest on R&D, but also to adopt cleaner ways of production and consumption? You can share some examples of Malaysia as well. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Zakri, I'm sure will be sharing his experiences. Malaysia is the leader among OIC countries in terms of high technology exports. And when the industry is export oriented, it is forced to invest into R&D as well. And the private sector is a very flourishing sector. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, what happened is I just talked about the bureaucratic disconnect, and that is hurting us a lot. In Pakistan, we have the Board of Investment, which focuses on increasing investments inside Pakistan. Then we have the Ministry of Commerce, which has a role in maximizing Pakistan's exports. Then we have Ministry of Industries, which is supposed to look at industrialization of Pakistan, and the Ministry of Science and Technology. Now, the Board of Investment does not work in tandem with the Ministry of Commerce, which is the case in most of the developed countries. The investment, the commerce, and the industrial and the ministries of industries, they are usually one ministry in most of the developed world. In Pakistan, they are working at cross purposes. Procter and Gamble is one of the largest investors in Pakistan, but most of their industries is oriented towards consumerism. So they come here, they set up the industry. It's all consumer products. People inside Pakistan consume it. Nothing is exported. The only thing which gets expatriated, repatriated are the profits they make. So we end up having industry which is not contributing to export. And they don't have an incentive to invest in R&D because their parent companies are outside Pakistan, where they do the R&D. So that is where we have been missing in terms of R&D. The Ministry of Commerce, on the other hand, wants to increase the exports. So Board of Investment should be focusing on bringing in industries which are export oriented. And once the industry is export oriented, it perforce invests in R&D as well. I'm surprised that we prioritize in our annual trade policy the export of rice from Pakistan, and it fetches us sizable revenue. But what is rice? It is more than 80% embedded water. Water being the most scarce commodity inside Pakistan, we are exporting one of our most precious commodities. And the Ministry of Science and Technology doesn't stop it. So there is a need to have proper coordination between all the organizations. And once that is done, R&D will also get prioritized. Thank you.
Now we will have a break of about 20 minutes. We will reassemble at 11:45. We break for tea. And before that, you are welcome to join us for the group photograph outside on the terrace with one polite request that the first row of the photograph may kindly be left vacant for our guests from the diplomatic corps. Thank you. My good friend. I'm ready. So welcome back to the second session. And Zakri will continue his lecture on science diplomacy for sustainable development. All those outside are requested to please join the meeting. Professor Zakri.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to my second hour lecture, the more interesting one from the first one just now. So those who stay back, I think are lucky than those who have to leave. So, ladies and gentlemen, science diplomacy for sustainable development. That's the topic of my lecture. I'm now founding a center at the UCSI University in Kuala Lumpur on International Institute of Science Diplomacy and Sustainability. Normally, these kind of centers are established in the developed world, in Harvard, in Europe, in the UK, but there's very few in the developing country. So this institute that I just launched is intended to be a center of excellence for science diplomacy and sustainability, and also not only catering for Malaysia, but hopefully for also in the developing South. So, yes, let me recall, when you talk about diplomacy, and many of you here are diplomats, you may have read about this infamous gunboat diplomacy around 1852 to 56, when America, through Commodore Perry, tried to open up Japan. If you read stories about Japan, they are a very close-knit country. They don't want outsiders. And they thought that the shogun and the warriors there can keep their country close, but not with Commodore Perry. All he needs to do is sail into Yokohama and fire a number of shots in the air. The Japanese have no answer for that. So that's the beginning of this intrusion of America in Japan. This is an old picture of that. Of course, after the Second World War, the dynamic is changed again. But today, of course, most of today's diplomacy are conducted in a civil manner and full of decorum. We call you by your country's name, and we call you by your excellency. We don't call you by name in the negotiation, It's very proper. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is science diplomacy? It's just the use of scientific collaboration among nations to address common problems and to build constructive international partnership. A very recent example of which I'm involved in Southeast Asia is when we are confronted with the AIDS problem. And Bapak from Jakarta, you recall, the two governments have their own way of managing it, yeah? Not to mention political differences. But I was sent to on a mission to talk with my counterparts, the academic in Jakarta, in Sumatra. We found a solution, scientifically speaking, but eventually we can't implement it because at the end of the day, it's a political decision. That's what I meant by this political will and all that. So in the end, the politics run the show. So you can be a diplomat, but you are under instruction from your government. So that's one example of science diplomacy. Once again, I think my colleague this morning mentioned about science diplomacy not being new, actually. So it has been taking place since the beginning of human civilization. For some of you from Iraq, or Iran, you may know this scientific exchange in ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Greece in the Western world, And of course, for us also, we know about the Chinese Silk Road today transformed into, what is that now? I forgot to know the acronym. Yeah? Belt and Road Initiative, sorry. So that's another form of science diplomacy in the modern world. Of course, again, the international treaties for nuclear disarmament and scientific cooperation between the US and the USSR during the Cold War. So Khrushchev would be at loggerhead with Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and Richard Nixon. But the scientific communities from Soviet Union then and the American were doing a lot of research, in the background. And in some ways, they help diffuse the misconception between the two countries. And of course, of recent time, we heard of governance and scientific cooperation in ungoverned spaces like Antarctica, which is no one's jurisdiction, right? Or the deep ocean, the deep seabeds, or even space. And we also heard this morning about this nuclear facility, CERN in Switzerland, a collaboration of a number of countries in physics. And last year, Sesame, which is unheard of. This is a collaboration in the Middle East between a number of countries in the region and Israel. Can you believe that? It only happened through science diplomacy. So these are some examples to entice you about science diplomacy. So what is new about science diplomacy is very new. It's a new term coined by US Foreign Policy Initiative. And this is out of their interest to promote soft power, the US soft power, and to repair the country's reputation and image in the Middle East, in particular after the invasion of 2003. So in that way, there was one program called the US Science Envoy Program, part of President Obama's New Beginning initiative engaging the Muslim communities. And you may also have been briefed that this was launched in 2009 in its speech at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, using new science envoys to develop programs on energy, green jobs, digitize record, clean water, and grow new crops. In other words, it's almost like the precursor of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And among the three early science envoys are Dr. Bruce Albert from the National Science Foundation, Dr. Ilyas Zahoni from the National Institute of Health, and the late Ahmad Zewel, who is from Egypt, but working in Caltech in California. But today, I'm not sure how effective and sustainable are the programs initiated by Obama. Surely we have not heard a high-profile development in the so-called New Beginning initiative on science and technology. So just to recap, science diplomacy is an international, interdisciplinary, and inclusive process, which eventually will lead to informed decision-making. In terms of diplomacy, is to balance national interests and common interests for the benefit of Earth across generations. So this is also the reason which I provided in the first lecture on the challenges of sustainable development. And the picture of the earth, as you know, nation state, its interest is only 30%, but the international interest or the common interest is 70%. So it's incumbent for us to collaborate. And collaboration in science, you know, is a very real thing. Here is just a graph describing the numerous international environmental treaties. And you'll see, without dialogue between countries, you have World War I, World War II, you know, and it's a recent discussion among countries when we don't have any more world wars. And some of the reasons for that is the continuing dialogue on science diplomacy involving some of the areas here, deep sea, outer space, Antarctica, and the high seas. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to sustainable development, which everyone should know. Every diplomat should know also what to do with it. And this is about meeting the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generation. It's led by Madam Gro Harlem Brundtland, the Prime Minister of Norway. And this report, Our Common Future, is like a blueprint on the environment and development. By the way, I think Emil Salim is one of the living authors in this Our Common Future. Emil Salim is the eminent economist from Indonesia. So, and the main problem, this is also captured in my earlier lecture, that range from food security, climate change, biodiversity loss, water, poverty, and urbanization. We are trying to assist this through science, technology, and innovation. Because as Antonio Guterres remarked in a recent statement, humankind are destroying nature at an unprecedented pace, which resulted in climate disruption, biodiversity loss, and pollution. So the question is, how can we solve this together? And I also have this slide, actually, when we said, this is a quote from Gordon Brown, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who said that many of the challenges we face today are international, and no one country can solve it. So science diplomacy through multilateral approach is very necessary. Let me just spend a few minutes on how I got into science diplomacy. Actually, I'm a student of science diplomacy since 30 years ago. I was comfortable as a research scientist at a university back home until I was enlisted as a technical advisor to our country's negotiation in UN meetings, particularly on biodiversity. So I also joined the UN University in Tokyo for nearly 10 years and involved in many of these mega projects. For instance, I'm also one of the science advisors to the UN Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. And one of Ban's interests is how to use science to solve global problems. So these are some of the early pictures. I think Ambassador, you may know, Ambassador Ting here is one of the illustrious Malaysian diplomat who's feared by the Western powers, really, because she spoke her mind. And I'll tell you why, because you may agree with me that many of these global agendas are set by people in developed countries who doesn't have much in terms of the environment, but telling us what to do. We don't like that, you know. But to counter them, you must have knowledge. So I was one of the technical advisors. It's a science diplomacy in action. We travel to many countries, attend many meetings. This is when I was at the UN University and also affiliating with Ban Ki-moon, sharing some of those meetings, meeting with Big Bill Clinton. So I was fortunate to chair a meeting that he delivered a message on diplomacy really in Tokyo. This guy is a mega star. We opened one big hall, then we have to open 3 more halls. You know, Japanese were really excited to listen to him. Because I'm also affiliated with this man here, you know him, Mahathir of Malaysia, and also one of the prime ministers, which I'm not going to mention his name. And of course, working with the late Shinzo Abe from Japan. And lastly, I was in Turkey, accompanying the 9th Prime Minister of Malaysia, Sabri. So it's all about, for me, projecting Malaysia's role and also practicing diplomacy, the art and practice of conducting negotiation between nations. And I think all of you, in particular from the diplomatic community here, would agree with me by this quote, yeah, at the end. An ambassador is an honest gentleman or woman sent to lie abroad for the good of his country. Would you agree with me on that? I see no objection. It's true. Sometimes you don't like it, but you have to follow what your country leaders ask you to do, right? Yeah. So I don't trust any one of you here from the diplomatic community. Anyway, so what do we do? So this is the one I mentioned just now about the common interest and how STI can help overcome many of these challenges. And I must also point out that STI need not only be generated by developed countries, but also by developing countries like Pakistan, India, Iran, and many others, you know. It's just that sometimes we are quite unsure of what to do. So in terms of the awareness and wherewithal on the sustainability issues, this has been started quite some time ago in the UN, I think in 1972, yeah. And there are world leaders attending, people like Indira Gandhi, who told the world that don't tell us what to do, we know what to do with our country. And talk about this common future and how the world has responded. Yeah, these are some pictures from the Earth Summit in 1992, the World Summit on SD in 2002, and on and on. Very impressive indeed. Like for instance, the product of the Earth Summit, it produced Agenda 21. But ladies and gentlemen, as most things, it's full of rhetoric, full of action plans. You would ask yourself to what extent those action plans are being developed. For most of the time, we can't make it. One of the reasons for that, there's a lot of money needed. And developing countries where most of the problems are not rich enough to put money into this program, and industrialized countries sometimes or most of the time are quite reluctant to part with their funding. These are all rhetoric. The Paris Climate Summit in 2015, which resulted in a milestone for the way forward to reduce the danger of climate change. Same thing in December last year in Montreal, the so-called agreement on the global biodiversity framework. So let me just spend a few minutes on who set the agenda. Most of the time is the rich countries, the so-called global north. They are historically responsible for climate change, biodiversity loss, and plastic pollution. And in terms of global warming, they've been doing it since the advent of the industrial revolution. But now they need to have the rest of the world to toe the line. So this is a major issue between countries. The global south, mainly from the third world or the developing world, we are mainly on the receiving end. Consultants do that, but you know, our countries still need sometimes to utilize some of those resources for development, for socio-economic advances, for job creation, for prosperity. And developing countries kept saying, yes, we are jointly responsible, but we have differentiated responsibility, common but differentiated principle. This one is largely ignored by the rich countries, of course, and it creates big problems. Just look at this, yeah? A recent report released last year, commissioned by Britain and Egypt, on the commitment of developing countries to meet their climate change goals. $1 trillion a year. Okay, $1 trillion a year. But what is now in the TT is only about 20 billion. So you can imagine, and just now we also heard the fact that rich industrialized countries produce far more emissions that have caused all these problems. And continent like Africa is responsible for just 3% of the emissions that humans have ever put into the atmosphere. And yet, these are the regions that suffers the most from climate change, from poor harvest and wildlife destruction. So talk about equitable world is not. So I just want to argue here, the global south needs to be better prepared in science diplomacy. Policymakers, negotiators, diplomats gathered here need more awareness and understanding on the potential of STI for sustainable development. And bodies like comstech or comstech can be the platform to articulate some of these concerns. And there's also the need for political understanding, political commitment, political leadership. In other words, leaders must appreciate the role of science, technology, and innovation, like, for instance, allocating more money for R&D. So I think I've come to the end of my session, but I'll be very happy to entertain any views from you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Zakri. If there are any questions, I'm sure he's happy to respond. Yes, please go ahead.
Once again. See, my concern is we always talk about science diplomacy and sustainable development goals. Now the debate is that what is the sustainability of sustainable development goals? Earlier we have MDGs, and without reflecting upon success or failure of MDGs, we launched SDGs. So this is one part I want your insight. And the second concern is, earlier the scientists were known for their inventions. And now the invention term has been converted into innovation. So what is the interpretation of innovation in terms of invention which was practiced earlier? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Very good questions, but not entirely correct. Number one, you mentioned about the Millennium Development Goals. First, the MDGs have 7 goals, and they are mostly men. So the SDG is just expanding the 7 to 17, which is bigger and more interesting, and addressing the needs of the current generation, actually. Second one is on what you're saying. Yeah.
Goals, but how we prioritize.
Well, it depends on the country, really. Some countries like SDG number 1, elevating poverty. For countries like Malaysia is less relevant. You know why? Since independence in 1957, the Malaysian government have target poverty elevation. That's the number 1. But because we are a small developing country, nobody really wants to know about it. But we have been doing that. So in Malaysia, then the level of poverty at independence is around 47%. And now it's less than 10%. That's a huge success. So if you travel to Malaysia, and I'm sure many of you have done that, the first thing that you will see when you arrive at KL International Airport is the sea of oil palm plantation around you. For Malaysian, that's a very emotive issue. It reminded us of how one of our leaders, Tun Razak, the second PM, commit himself to alleviate poverty. His words were land for the landless, jobs for the jobless. And we have done very well. But today that is controversial because in our zealousness to open up land, sometimes we pay less attention to the need for conservation. Of course, when you see orangutan fighting bulldozers, when forests are being cut, we feel the same way, just like others in Brussels or New York, we care for the animal. So then the question is, lady, for us, at least in my country, how do you balance the need for conservation at one end, the need for development? So we haven't really find that out. So that's one, the priority, poverty elevation. Second one is, of course, education, which we have done quite well, many countries too. And many of us are coming from poor families, but education, as they say, is a great equalizer. And yeah, that kind of thing. Like my life, my father is a lorry driver, and 3 of his children got to university. Education, So I'm quite proud to mention that. So when we talk about the SDGs, what are the priorities? It depends on the country. Some will be on healthcare, some others on smart cities, and on and on. But as I also pointed out today, the SDGs are not meeting its target. One of the reasons for that, God has imposed on us COVID-19, and that set us back several years, But I think as long as we keep on talking, and this is where science diplomacy comes in and find solutions, I think we can solve that, inshallah. All right?
Yes, please. Go ahead. Mic, please.
Thank you very much, Professor Zakri. My question is that science diplomacy has resulted in some way creation of this perhaps fund lately for the climate change and all the effects that are going to be in different parts of the world, floods or other destructions. You see, the recent destruction in Turkey and Syria, which is obviously we say it's earthquake and all that. Do you think or do you think that it has any relationship with our activities over the world, or which is affecting inside the world? Or if yes, then obviously this fund should also include such damages or destructions. Thank you very much.
Can you repeat the last part of your question? The most important one, you're talking about the happenings what in war-torn Syria, right?
No, the earthquakes in Turkey and Syria.
Yeah. Yeah, what can we say about that? Because earthquake are God-given, you know, just have to take it in stride. But in the UN, there is such a process called the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Management. So it's not part of the SDGs, but it has its own life, its own structure. Sendai Framework on disaster risk management. And they have done lots of work. Of course, taking the examples from earthquake-prone Japan, yeah, and also countries like Turkey. So there are two separate but related process, of course, because it relates to human life. Maybe the lady from Thailand.
Before that, let me just address the first part of this
Yeah.
question, with your permission. The first part of your question was basically whether the recent earthquakes or other earthquakes have anything to do with human activity on the surface of the earth. And the answer is categorically no, nothing to do with it. This is a terrestrial process within the core of the earth, and it has to do with the various tectonic plates within the earth, which have over millions and billions of years developed and have certain stresses at certain points, and they're pushing against each other and trying to resolve those stresses. And sometimes they become unsustainable and they result in earthquakes. In fact, the recent earthquake in Turkey was predicted, I think a couple of weeks before it happened, it was predicted that this would happen within a couple of years. A major catastrophic earthquake was predicted in the same region, but it was not, of course, given as the exact time. It was said that it's just about to happen anywhere within a matter of a year, because they keep monitoring the stresses or the shifting of the plate somehow. And so this is, of course, it's a process which is understood in its mechanism, but of course, it is not one of those things where you can predict the exactness when it will happen.
Thank you.
You said somebody had a question.
I want the lady diplomat from Thailand to ask me a question. You don't want?
Sir, my question is,
Where are you? Please raise your hand.
sir, my name is Haider Ali Khan. I am from ISRA. Sir, I would like to ask a question about the sustainable development. And sir, cheap energy is a prerequisite for development, and the industrialized world has been through that process. And they have exploited these natural resources, which serve as a backbone of their industrial development. But now we see that, as you have rightly said, that the global north sets the agenda, and the global south usually is expected to follow those agendas. So um, green energy is a very expensive thing for countries which are not developed, which have not developed yet economically and even socially. For example, a country like Pakistan. So, is there any framework, international framework in place to facilitate the sustainable development of underdeveloped countries? If we are expected not to contribute to climate change, because without industrialization, no country can develop. So is there any framework, international framework in place to facilitate the development of underdeveloped countries?
There's no framework or program to deny climate change. In fact, Pakistan is one of those UN member states who signed the Paris Agreement in 2015 that we must reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, which are the cause of global warming. The thing that we need to understand, different countries have different rates of development. And for the world to say you must stop depending on coal, that is unreasonable, isn't it? So for countries like that, I think they're given the leeway to develop their own program of work. There is such a thing called the NDC, Nationally Determined Contribution, NDC. This is left to each country to tell when you're going to be carbon-free, zero emission. For more ambitious countries, they say by 2030, we're not going to use fossil fuel for cars. Like, for instance, the Volvo company said they're going to use on electric vehicles and all that. But for some other countries, we take our time, you know. It's unreasonable to have one shoes fit all. But eventually, the world recognized that the use of this fossil fuel is damaging to the world, actually. But it's not easy. Have countries have different levels of development. Okay. Any other question? Please raise your hand. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. This is me, Dr. Abdurrahman from Yemen. Okay, you hear now?
Yeah.
Okay, regarding, I'm just talking about the science diplomacy. Like this terminology, it's not, I mean, familiar with all the OIC countries. So, I mean, if they're like any platform or recommendations from this, I mean, summit or meeting to the OIC's countries that please think about a science of diplomacy of your countries, so that there will be like, I mean, like if they make like a unit or department in each country, this department will work like a linkage or bridge between different ministries or something like that. Yes, people maybe they are working on science of diplomacy, but they don't have it in a proper platform.
Oh, yes, it's a good question, and that's something which comstech and my university are contemplating. We're trying to develop, and also ComSat, I think, to develop a program of public awareness and capacity building among countries in the OIC. So that means a short 2-day workshop on awareness, maybe a 1-week workshop on training, you know, or sending scholars to centers of excellence and all that. So we are working on it. Because science diplomacy is quite new, you know? But the essence is to make sure that the knowledge generators, like the scientists in the universities and lab, could showcase their R&D product to be used by the public and the country. And to do that, we need to reach out to our policymakers, senior civil servants and political leaders, as long as those recipient of that knowledge don't really understand, we can't convince them to develop the program. Because at the end of the day, it costs money, to do this. What we have in the planning in the OIC countries, or with funding from the Islamic Development Bank and all this.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have an online question. In fact, we have a couple of them. First of all, from Dr. Munif Zubi, who is in Jordan and is a long associate of the Islamic Academy of Sciences and vast experience in these matters. So if you can hear me, Dr. Zubi, welcome to you and over to you for your comment and question.
Thank you very much, Comstech. Thank you very much, Tansiri Zakri, for an excellent and comprehensive expose of science diplomacy and the use of this tool to bridge divides between countries, cultures, and civilizations. Of course, I fully subscribe to most of what you said in your two eloquent presentations. However, I would propose an alternative reading, if I may, and something that perhaps can be built upon in terms of a program for Comstech and the OIC. I've come up with a slightly different and alternative definition of science diplomacy whilst listening to your presentation. And that is, science diplomacy lies at the line of intersection, or the common agenda, to coin the phrase of the UN Secretary General, between the STI community nationally and internationally, and the polity. The polity being the politicians, the business community, and the NGOs. So I think any interaction between the science community and the non-science community is essentially a form of science diplomacy. And this leads me to the second point, if I may. You've mentioned very eloquently the STI architecture or ecosystem in many of our countries. You have been leading a great effort to get our OIC countries to really complete the jigsaw, as you once mentioned, of establishing their national STI ecosystems by building up their national academies of sciences as advisory mechanisms on STI policy development and implementation. And this also leads me to a little proposal, if I may. I think it's probably worthwhile to consider having our own science diplomacy envoys in a way similar to the Obama initiative of 2009. I think we have the capacity within the OIC to identify our own science diplomacy envoys, people such as Tansiri Zakri, people such as Professor Ata al-Rahman, and people such as Professor Aziz Sancar, the Turkish-German Nobel laureate, to essentially build up the capacity of the non-STI community within our ranks. In particular, civil servants in many of our countries who are still not fully appreciative of the power of science and technology for socioeconomic development. Our diplomats within OIC countries need to be exposed to the value of science and science diplomacy as a means to move forward, and our parliamentarians as well. In the majority of OIC countries, our parliaments, I can speak for Jordan, for example, and other countries, we do not have STI parliamentary committees. And such committees, at the end of the day, are the people that sanction or approve the budgets for scientific activities. So my humble proposal would be to think of launching our own envoys, choosing our own envoys to lobby for science and science diplomacy at the OIC level. And secondly, to build up the capacity of our non-STI community so that they really appreciate the value of science and technology and innovation as a means to address economic problems, contribute to world knowledge in science and technology, and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm sorry to have taken so long, but this is what I have to say. Thank you very much.
Chair, I agree with all that has been proposed by Dr. Zobi. Hanif, I wish you were here, but you have taken up nearly 5 minutes of our time. Thank you.
If I may also make a comment on Dr. Zubi's suggestions. The point about sensitizing our political leadership and decision makers about the importance of science is, of course, well taken. But let me say that you will often hear our leaderships articulate the need and the importance of science, but you will not find them really taking the required steps and putting their money where their mouth is. And the problem is that, in my opinion, that, unless we are geared towards finding local solutions to local problems, unless we appreciate, our governments appreciate the need for indigenization of our technology and our self-reliance, these will only remain words to be bandied around. And that, in my opinion, that's the main problem, that they're all aware of the need for finding solutions, but they're not aware or they're not appreciating that much of this can be done at home. You don't have to constantly look towards the imported technology or imported ideas or imported materials for solutions to social, economic, and local problems. Anyway, that's my position. We had another question from a lady, I think Samia, but she seems to have left. Okay. Is there anyone else here, physically or online, who has a question? We do have time, and we can accommodate a couple of questions. Okay, I don't see any questions or any hands raised here or online. So I think with that, we can probably come to the end of our very interesting and informative lectures, and discussions also have been very informative. And once again, I think it is, I thank you very much from my own side and from the side of Comstech to have attended this event. Thank you very much, Professor Zakri. What I can hope is that we can continue on this line, and we can probably develop your themes in a manner that we can have now more participation from our member states of the OIC, for example, in some kind of training workshops, if you believe that would be more useful. Interactive sessions would be useful, because as has been expressed in this discussion by several participants, there's of course a very strong need for sensitizing the policymakers on the various aspects of cooperation and science diplomacy. And as I suggested, the need for innovation, they're all coupled together, actually. And of course, the issue of sustainability, we heard two sides of the argument. That is, one is a general expression of the need for bioconservation and lesser emissions, And on the other hand, we hear that the development needs of our countries do require the expenditure of energy, because obviously we are not we are very minor contributors to the global emissions. But we have to remember that there are certain things that we do in our own interest. If we do burn more coal, then we are going to get more pollution locally as well. If we do cut down our forests, it's not only going to be something that adds globally, it is something that will locally affect your populations, locally affect your climate and your weather. Your rainfalls are going to be affected by the loss of green cover. So there are many steps here that are important, not only in the global, but in the local context of preserving your environment, as well as protecting yourself from the devastations of floods. As you know, if there are trees and there is forest cover, there is covering the mountains, you do have lesser devastation in the form of floods. Pakistan, of course, is highly vulnerable to these effects. And I may also just add, I don't know how Professor Zakri is, how familiar he is with the Central Asian situation, that is the 30% of the glaciers of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan have actually melted.
Wow.
And these, as you know, these glaciers are the primary, in fact, the source of the rivers of Central Asia, the two major rivers, the Amu River and the Sayar Darya. They are the two, the Oxus, as it is known. And these pass through various countries. So the whole region of Central Asia and South Asia is facing this very, very serious challenge of climate related effects, not only for the rainfall patterns, but also in terms of the melting of glaciers, which would result in higher levels of water initially, but in the longer run, it would lead to, of course, drought conditions when these glaciers have melted away. So the other part of your discourse is about the diplomacy, and that of course means cooperation between member states to address these challenges. And as I tried to say myself, that these challenges are so international, they are cross-border, they are cross-regional. There is no way single countries can address these, not only in terms of, for example, recently Pakistan received pledges from a lot of countries and organizations with relation to the effects of the recent floods and to mitigate the effects of those floods, resettle people. And of course, those are very welcome initiatives. But there are, of course, more important technological measures and sustainability measures where the cooperation between the states and their agreements to cut down on emissions or whatever other or technologies which are adopting greener technologies, etc. These do require understanding cross borders and cooperation across borders. And that's where science and the diplomacy comes in, as Professor Zakri has very articulately explained to us. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Chair. Before expressing my concluding remarks, I used to teach at the university as a professor. I need to respond to the question about what is the difference between invention and innovation. As you know, to invent something is to discover a new thing. Meanwhile, to innovate means to use a new idea or method. To innovate is to introduce something new to the market, to manipulate existing inventions and turn them into a product or process that is of use in the real world. This is lacking most of the time from university research. But that will be the subject of another seminar. So thank you so much for taking care of me and the comstech here. I've always been very happy to be back in Islamabad. And thank you for giving me the space to hear our remarks. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. And we have a small tradition of sharing the comstech shield with our presenters. So I would request Dr. Abdul Rashid on behalf of Comstech to present the shield to Professor Zakri. You come down. Oh, so that it is more visible. All right.